The night hummed with the kind of electric energy only Hollywood can conjure. It was after a big awards show, the kind where celebrities wear borrowed diamonds and photographers flash cameras until the air feels thick with light. Now, the real party had started, not the televised one with speeches and statues, but the private, exclusive after-party in a hotel ballroom where the walls were lined with velvet and the drinks were poured by bartenders who didn't ask for names. The room was a sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns. Laughter bubbled up like champagne, glasses clinked, and somewhere a bass-heavy beat thumped under it all. But when the double doors at the far end swung open, the chatter dipped for a second, then rose again, sharper this time. Will Smith had arrived. He didn't just walk in, he glided. His suit was sharp, maybe midnight blue, with just enough sheen to catch the light as he moved. His smile was the first thing anyone noticed, wide, bright, the kind that made you feel like he was already in on the joke with you. He waved at a cluster of producers, high-fived a young actor who looked like he might faint, and when someone called his name, he turned, pointed, and winked. It was seamless. Effortless. Will knew how to work a room, and tonight, he was in top form. Around him, people gravitated like planets to a sun. A director leaned in to whisper something, and Will threw his head back laughing, a sound that cut through the noise, warm and booming. A couple of models drifted closer, just to be near the glow of him. He was telling a story now, his hands moving as he painted the air with words, something about a stunt on his last movie, maybe, or his kid's latest prank. Everyone hung on every syllable, grinning like they'd been let in on a secret. That was Will's gift. He made you feel important just by being near him, like you were part of his world, not just watching it. On the other side of the room, the vibe was completely different. Keanu Reeves stood near the edge of the bar, a half-empty glass in one hand, the other resting lightly on the counter. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. His hair was a little mussed, like he'd run his fingers through it one too many times. While Will's corner was loud and bright, Keanu's was quiet, almost still. He wasn't alone, a few people were nearby, chatting in low tones, but he wasn't the center of it. He nodded when someone spoke to him, smiled a small, polite smile, but his eyes kept drifting around the room, taking it all in without trying to be part of it. It was like he was observing from behind a glass wall, content to just be. A younger actor, maybe in his early 20s, approached him, looking nervous. Keanu turned, gave him his full attention, and said something that made the kid's shoulders relax. No big gestures, no booming laugh, just calm, steady presence. That was Keanu, unassuming, grounded, like a tree that doesn't need to shout to be seen. The contrast between the two was stark, almost like a scene from a movie. Will was fire crackling, bright, impossible to ignore. Keanu was water deep, quiet, flowing around everything without making a splash. And as the night went on, the room seemed to split in two, the loud, orbiting sun around Will, and the still, unmoving stone around Keanu. Will, in his element, didn't notice at first. He was too busy holding court, too busy being the guy everyone wanted to talk to. But then, as he turned to grab a drink from a passing waiter, his gaze swept across the room and landed on Keanu. For a second, his smile faltered, just a flicker, like a camera flash going off in a dark room. He watched Keanu listen to someone, that small, steady smile in place, and something shifted in Will's eyes. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was the competitive spark that had driven him his whole life. But suddenly, the party felt too easy. He'd conquered this room 100 times before. What was the fun in that? His eyes narrowed slightly, the gears turning behind them. He took a sip of his drink, set it down on a high-top table with a clink, and started moving. Not toward the producers or the models or the people hanging on his every word, straight toward Keanu. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, but Will wasn't looking at them. His focus was locked, laser sharp, on the man by the bar. Keanu, sensing movement nearby, looked up, and their eyes met across the room. Will's grin was back, wider now, with a hint of something else, mischief, maybe. Challenge. Keanu just watched him, calm as ever, like he was waiting to see what the tide would bring. The room held its breath, even if nobody realized it yet. The sun was moving toward the stone, and everyone could feel it. Something was about to happen. Will picked up his pace, his hands already moving as he started to frame the joke, the roast, the little jab he'd been crafting in his head. He was the king of Hollywood tonight, and kings didn't let quiet corners stay quiet for long. Not when there was a throne to defend. And Keanu, he just stood there, sipping his drink, like he'd seen it all before. But deep down, maybe even he knew this night was about to change. The journey from one side of the ballroom to the other didn't take long, but for the people watching, it felt like a slow-motion scene in a movie. Will Smith moved with a specific kind of purpose. It wasn't an angry walk, or a rushed one. It was the walk of a man who had just spotted a new mountain to climb, just for the fun of it. As he navigated through the crowd, the energy shifted around him like a wave. People stepped aside, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. They could sense that something was about to happen. The Fresh Prince energy was dialing up, and everyone wanted a front row seat. Will passed a waiter carrying a tray of champagne, grabbing 2 glasses with a smooth, practiced move. He didn't drink from them, though. He held them like props, setting the stage. He stopped briefly to high-five a legendary producer, his laugh booming out again, but his eyes were already fixed on the target. He was locking in. The crowd near the bar began to thin out, sensing the collision course. The smart ones moved back to give them space, while the curious ones leaned in, pretending to check their phones but really watching every move. When Will finally reached the quiet corner where Keanu stood, the temperature in the room seemed to change. Keanu hadn't moved. He was still leaning against the bar, one foot crossed over the other, looking like a statue in a museum that someone had accidentally left in a nightclub. He watched Will approach with that same calm, unreadable expression he wore in his movies, the look that says he's thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else, even when he's perfectly still. Will didn't wait for an introduction. He didn't do the polite Hollywood thing, waiting for a lull in the conversation. He dove right in, splashing into the quiet waters like a cannonball. There he is. Will's voice rang out, loud and vibrant, cutting through the ambient noise of the party. He threw an arm out, gesturing grandly toward Keanu like he was showcasing a prize fighter. The man himself. The one. The only. A few people near the bar chuckled politely. Keanu straightened up, pushing himself off the railing. He offered a small nod, his polite, default greeting. "Hey, Will," he said. His voice was low, barely carrying over the music. "Good to see you." "Good to see me, man, it's great to see you." Will was vibrating with energy now. He took a sip from one of the glasses he was holding, then set them both down on the counter. He turned slightly, addressing not just Keanu, but the semicircle of people who had gathered to watch. He had an audience, and his instincts took over. "I was just telling these guys, Will said, his eyes sweeping the crowd before locking back onto Keanu. I was just saying, we need to talk about this guy. We need to address the elephant in the room. Keanu tilted his head slightly. He didn't look nervous, just attentive. What elephant is that? He asked softly. This whole vibe? Will laughed, throwing his hands up. Come on, man. Look at you. You're standing here in the middle of the biggest party of the year, looking like you're waiting for a bus in the rain. Seriously, bro, relax. You're allowed to smile. I've seen your movies. You save the entire human race, you dodge bullets, you fight the system. But in real life you look like you're thinking about your taxes. The crowd laughed. It was a nervous laugh at first, the kind you make when the popular kid in school starts teasing someone. Will was grinning, his teeth white and perfect, his whole body relaxed. He was in his element. He was the funny man, the entertainer, the guy who could lighten any mood. To him, this was just friendly banter. It was the way guys talk when they're sizing each other up, testing the waters. But to Keanu, standing there in his black suit, the words hung in the air. He didn't flinch. He didn't look down. He just looked at Will, his dark eyes reflecting the glitter of the room. Is that a bad thing? Keanu asked. His tone wasn't defensive. It was genuinely curious. It was such a simple question, but it made Will pause for a split second. Will shook his head, his grin widening. No, it's not bad. It's just intense. You're intense, man. I feel like if I say the wrong thing, you're gonna slow motion karate chop me right through a table. Will mimicked a martial arts move, chop slicing the air, making the crowd laugh louder this time. The tension was easing, turning into a show. I'm just saying, Will continued, stepping a little closer, lowering his voice just a notch so everyone had to lean in to hear. You gotta turn it down a notch. We're here to have fun. We're here to drink expensive champagne and pretend we like each other. He winked at the crowd, and they laughed with him now, fully on board. Will was the conductor of this orchestra, and he was playing them perfectly. You know, Will went on, looking Keanu up and down, I bet you practice that stare in the mirror, don't you? I bet you stand there for hours, just working on the I know kung fu but I'm also sad about the universe look. Admit it? It's a strategy. It's the John Wick brand. Keep em guessing. Will was on a roll now. He was feeling it. The room was with him. He was the king of the party, roasting the quiet guy in the corner, and it was all in good fun. Or at least, that's what he told himself. He could see the smiles on people's faces. He could feel the energy. It was intoxicating. He was winning. You need a drink, Will declared, grabbing one of the champagne glasses he had placed on the bar and shoving it toward Keanu. Actually, you need 2 drinks. And maybe a dance lesson. Loosen up, Keanu. The Matrix isn't real, but this party is. Live a little. He raised his own glass in a mock toast, waiting for Keanu to clink it, waiting for the shy smile, waiting for the other man to break character and just be one of the guys. That was the script in Will's head. He roasts, they laugh, they drink, everyone goes home saying how funny Will Smith is. But Keanu didn't reach for the glass immediately. He stood there, letting the echo of Will's voice fade away. He looked at Will, and then at the glass, and then back at Will. The polite mask was still there, but something else was happening behind those eyes. The crowd, still giggling from Will's jokes, started to quiet down. They sensed a shift. They realized that the roast might have gone a step too far, or that the reaction coming wasn't the one they expected. The air between the two men seemed to thicken. Will's smile didn't falter, but a tiny crease appeared between his eyebrows. He was waiting for the punchline to land, but the punchline wasn't coming from him anymore. The ball was in Keanu's court, and the whole room was holding its breath to see what he would do with it. The laughter that had filled the air just a moment ago didn't just fade away, it vanished. It was like someone had suddenly pulled the plug on the stereo, leaving the room in a strange, heavy vacuum. The smiles that had been plastered on people's faces began to wobble, then twitch, and then slowly slide into expressions of uncertainty. What had started as a funny bit, a classic Will Smith moment, was suddenly feeling very different. The air in the VIP lounge turned thick, almost hard to breathe. Will Smith was still standing there with his glass raised high, caught in the middle of his toast. He froze for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting around the circle of people. He was waiting for the signal that the joke had landed, the nod, the chuckle, the roar of approval. But it didn't come. Instead, he was met with wide eyes and shifting feet. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or look away. They could feel it, the vibe had shifted from playful to awkward in the blink of an eye. Then, slowly, almost deliberately, Keanu Reeves moved. He didn't look angry. That was the strangest part. His face wasn't red, and his jaw wasn't clenched. He didn't look like he wanted to fight. He just looked present. He reached out and placed his glass on the marble countertop of the bar. He did it slowly, carefully, pushing it away from him as if he needed his hands to be completely free. The soft clink of the glass hitting the stone sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Will's smile didn't drop, but it changed. It became tighter, a little more forced. He was a professional. He had hosted award shows and performed in front of millions. He knew how to handle a heckler. But this wasn't a heckler. This was the room turning against the rhythm he had set. He lowered his arm slowly, the champagne swirling gently in his glass. "I'm just messing with you, man," Will said, his voice dropping an octave. He tried to backtrack, to smooth over the rough edges he had created. He chuckled, a short, sharp sound meant to break the ice. "You know I love the serious vibe. It's the mystique. It's why the fans love you. I'm just saying, live a little." Usually, this is where the other person laughs. They are supposed to say, yeah, you got me, and take a sip of their drink. But Keanu didn't say a word. He didn't smile at the attempt to smooth things over. He simply turned his body fully toward Will. He wasn't slouching anymore. He stood straight up, and even though Will was a tall man, Keanu suddenly seemed to occupy just as much space. It wasn't about physical size, it was about gravity. Keanu had suddenly become very heavy, very real, while Will felt like he was floating on a bubble of hot air. The people standing closest to them took a small, unconscious step backward. It was a natural reaction to the magnetic tension crackling between the two stars. A young actor, who had been sipping his drink, nearly choked on it and quickly turned away, pretending to be fascinated by a painting on the far wall. No one wanted to be caught in the crossfire. They could sense that this wasn't just a scripted Hollywood moment anymore. This was two very different versions of masculinity colliding. Will cleared his throat. He felt the sweat trickling on the back of his neck. He was used to being the alpha, the one who controlled the narrative. He used his voice, his speed, his charm to dominate a room. But Keanu wasn't playing that game. Keanu was playing a different game entirely, one where silence was a weapon, and stillness was a fortress. Will threw his best punchline, and it had just hit a brick wall. "You know," Keanu said finally. His voice wasn't loud. In fact, it was barely above a whisper. But because the room was so silent, it carried perfectly. It had a raspy texture to it, grounded and rough. Will jumped on the words, relieved to hear something. "Exactly. You know what I'm talking about," Will said, nodding fast, trying to drag Keanu back into the friendly zone. "I'm just looking out for you, brother." Keanu looked at him. He didn't blink. He didn't nod along. He just looked directly into Will's eyes, his gaze unwavering. It was the kind of look that makes you feel like he can see right through the expensive suit and the fame, right down to the person underneath. It was an unsettling feeling for Will, who spent so much of his life projecting an image. Keanu wasn't looking at the image, he was looking at the man. The silence stretched out again. It lasted for 3 seconds. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. It felt like an hour. The music from the other side of the party thumped in the distance, a reminder that the rest of the world was still having fun, but in this corner, time had stopped. A bead of sweat rolled down Will's temple. He realized, with a sinking feeling in his stomach, that he had made a mistake. He had misjudged the room, and he had misjudged the man. He thought he was the shark circling a fish, but it turned out he might be the fish swimming next to something much deeper than he realized. Keanu shifted his weight. He took his hands out of his pockets and crossed them loosely over his chest. It was a defensive move, but it looked strong. It looked like he was ready to absorb anything Will could throw at him and not even feel it. Will tried one more time to laugh. It came out shaky. Okay, Will said, stepping back half a step, surrendering the floor. "I get it. The silent treatment. That's your move. I respect it." He looked at the crowd, desperate for an ally. But everyone was suddenly very interested in their shoes or the ceiling. They could see the writing on the wall. The dynamic had flipped. Will was the one performing, spinning plates, trying to keep the energy up. Keanu was just standing there, existing, and his presence was so heavy it was bending the floor. Will stopped talking. He realized that anything else he said would just make it worse. The silence was Keanu's turn to speak, and the universe was waiting. The anticipation in the room was unbearable. Everyone knew that something had to give. The pressure had built up to a breaking point. It was like watching a rubber band being stretched tighter and tighter, wondering exactly when it would snap. And when it did, they all had a feeling it wasn't going to be Will who controlled the rebound. Keanu took a slow breath in, his chest expanding, and then let it out. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile, but almost a recognition. He looked at Will, and the look in his eyes changed from heavy to focused, like a telescope locking onto a star. He was ready. And the whole room leaned in, terrified and thrilled, waiting for the quiet man to finally make a sound. Then, Keanu finally moved. He didn't make a big gesture or wave his hands around. He simply pushed himself off the bar and took a single, smooth step forward. It was a small movement, but it closed the gap between them in a way that felt massive. He was now well inside Will's personal space, close enough that they didn't need to raise their voices to be heard. The intimacy of it made the crowd lean in even further, desperate to catch the words. "You know," Keanu started, his voice low and rough, like the sound of gravel crunching under tires. "You're right, Will. You're absolutely right. Will blinked. He wasn't expecting that. A part of him had braced for an insult, or maybe a cold dismissal. But this sounded like agreement. A wide, relieved grin spread across Will's face. He straightened his jacket, thinking he had won. He thought he had cracked the code. "See, I told you," Will said, laughing again, though this time it was a bit more nervous. "I'm just looking out for you, man. We're in this crazy bubble together. We gotta stick together." Keanu nodded slowly. He looked down at the floor for a second, then back up, locking eyes with Will. There was no anger in his gaze, but there was a strength there that made Will's chuckle die in his throat. It was the kind of strength you don't get from shouting or flexing. It was the kind of strength that comes from enduring things, from going through the fire and coming out the other side quiet. "You do have a lot of energy," Keanu continued, speaking calmly, measuring every word. "It's amazing to watch, really. You walk into a room, and the whole room lights up. You tell a joke, and everybody laughs. You make a movie, and everybody cheers. You're giving them a show. You're giving them you." Will dipped his head in a modest bow. "I try, man. I try to give the people what they want. But that's the thing," Keanu said softly. The words landed like a pebble dropping into a still pond. "You're trying so hard." Will's smile froze. He didn't say anything. He just watched Keanu. "You're performing," Keanu said, gesturing slightly with his hand. "Right now. Here. With no cameras, no script, no award at stake. You're still performing. You're dancing as fast as you can because you're terrified that if you stop, if you're just quiet for a second, the magic will disappear. You think they love the show. But I think they love you. And you're hiding the real you behind all that noise." The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't just awkward anymore, it was profound. The people nearby stopped fidgeting. They stopped checking their phones. They were witnessing a masterclass in social dynamics. Will opened his mouth to speak, to cut in with a quick joke or a denial, but he found he couldn't. Keanu's words had pinned him in place. It wasn't an attack, it was a mirror. Keanu was holding up a mirror and forcing Will to look at himself. "It's exhausting, isn't it?" Keanu asked, his voice almost sympathetic now. "Carrying the whole room, trying to be the sun for everybody, it burns you out, man. I see it. You're burning bright, but you're burning yourself up." Will looked at Keanu, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time that night. He saw the man who had lost the love of his life, who had faced unimaginable tragedy, and who was still standing. Still kind. Still humble. Keanu didn't need to be the loudest in the room because he knew exactly who he was when the lights went out. And suddenly, Will felt incredibly small. Not because Keanu was bigger, but because Will realized he had been playing a child's game while Keanu was playing an adult's game. "I don't need to try to be interesting," Keanu said, a tiny, genuine smile finally touching his lips. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was a kind one. "I just need to be here. And the people who matter, they stay. The rest, it's just noise." He paused, letting the wisdom sink in. Then, he delivered the final blow, softer than a whisper but harder than a punch. "You don't have to fight for their attention, Will. You already have it. Just breathe. Let the silence be okay. You don't always have to be on." It was a total dismantling. Will Smith, the man who could command any stadium, who could make millions laugh with a single raise of an eyebrow, felt the wind leave his sails. He realized that by trying to roast Keanu, by trying to prove he was the cooler or funnier guy, he had actually shown his own insecurity. He had been the loud one covering up the quiet. Keanu, the quiet one, was actually the most grounded person in the building. The air in the room cleared. The tension didn't snap, it dissolved, replaced by a strange sense of peace. A woman standing near the bar let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Someone else whispered, "Wow." Will stared at Keanu for a long moment. The famous Fresh Prince grin was gone, replaced by a look of genuine respect. He saw the truth in what Keanu had said. He saw that he didn't need to perform here. He didn't need to be the jock, the hero, the star. He could just be a man at a party. "So," Will said, his voice lacking the booming projection from before. It sounded smaller, but realier. "You're saying I talk too much?" Keanu laughed. It was a short, dry sound, but it was warm. "I'm saying," Keanu replied, "that you deserve a break. Have a drink. Stand still. The world won't end if you stop moving for 5 minutes." Keanu reached out and patted Will gently on the shoulder. It was a brief contact, but it carried weight. It was an acceptance, a truce, and a welcome, all at once. Then, Keanu picked up his own glass, raised it in a silent toast, and took a sip. He didn't wait for Will to respond. He didn't need a round of applause. He had already won. For a few long seconds, Will just stood there. The mask of the superstar, the guy who always has the perfect line, the perfect smile, the perfect answer, seemed to crack right down the middle. He looked at Keanu, really looked at him, and the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had come over here to poke the bear, to tease the quiet guy, maybe to feel a little bit bigger by making someone else feel smaller. But it hadn't worked. It had completely backfired. Instead of making Keanu look odd or boring, Will had accidentally revealed his own insecurity. He had shown the whole room that he was working overtime to be liked, while Keanu was just standing there, comfortable in his own skin. Then, Will did something unexpected. He didn't get mad. He didn't storm off. He didn't try to argue. He let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding all night. It was a deep, heavy exhale that seemed to deflate his puffed-up chest. His shoulders dropped 2 inches. The frantic energy that buzzed around him like a swarm of bees suddenly settled down. "You got me," Will said. It wasn't a loud announcement. It was a quiet admission. He shook his head, a look of genuine surprise crossing his face. "Man, you really got me." A slow smile spread across Will's face, but it wasn't the Hollywood grin from before. It was smaller, softer. It was real. He started laughing. It wasn't the booming look at me laugh, it was a chuckle that started in his belly and bubbled up. He reached out and grabbed Keanu by the shoulder, giving it a firm, respectful squeeze. "I came over here to roast you, man," Will said, still chuckling, wiping a hand over his face. "I thought I was gonna be funny. I thought I was the cool guy. And you just stood there and told me the truth. You didn't even try to be funny. You were just real." Keanu's face relaxed. The intense focus softened back into his usual gentle expression. He shrugged slightly, like it was no big deal. "We're all just people, Will. Just trying to get through the night." Will nodded. He looked down at his own hands for a moment, then back up at the crowd. He realized that half the room was still staring at them, waiting to see what would happen next. But Will didn't feel the need to perform for them anymore. He didn't feel the need to be the sun that blinded everyone. He turned back to Keanu. "You know what, you're right," Will said, his voice carrying a new weight, a new sense of calm. "I am tired. It is exhausting carrying all that energy around. It's like being on a treadmill that never stops. And you're just sitting on a park bench watching me run." "Looks tiring," Keanu said, a small twinkle in his eye. "It is." Will laughed again. "I need to get off the treadmill. I need to learn how to just stand still." He picked up the glass of champagne he had abandoned earlier. He held it up, not as a prop, but as an offering. "To the park bench," Will said. Keanu clinked his glass against Will's. "To the park bench." They both drank. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a treaty being signed. The tension that had choked the room just minutes ago vanished completely. It didn't just fade, it was replaced by something warmer. The people standing nearby, who had been holding their breath, finally let it out. The atmosphere shifted from awkward to intimate. It felt like they were watching two brothers make up after a long argument, even though they had barely known each other before tonight. The rest of the night seemed to flow differently after that. Will didn't go back to the center of the room to hold court. He didn't demand attention. He stayed right there in the corner, leaning against the bar next to Keanu. He stopped talking at people and started talking with them. He listened more than he spoke. People came up to say hello, expecting the loud, energetic Will Smith, and they found something better. They found a guy who was actually listening to them. Keanu didn't say much for the rest of the party. He didn't need to. He had already made his point. He stood there, sipping his drink, chiming in every now and then with a quiet comment that made everyone laugh or think. He and Will stood side by side, the loud man and the quiet man, the fire and the water. And instead of colliding and destroying each other, they balanced each other out. It was a strange, perfect harmony. As the night went on, the lights dimmed a little, and the music got slower. People began to drift away, heading home or to other parties. But the story of what happened at the bar stayed with the people who saw it. It became one of those Hollywood legends that people whisper about in makeup chairs and on set. They didn't talk about who won the argument, because it wasn't really a fight. They talked about the moment the king of Hollywood stepped down from his throne to stand on the ground, and the quiet guy showed him how to walk. It was a master class in confidence. Will learned that night that you don't have to shout to be heard, and Keanu proved that you don't have to perform to be respected. Eventually, it was time to go. Will put on his coat. He turned to Keanu and stuck out his hand. Keanu took it, pulling him into a quick, one-armed hug. "Thanks for the lesson," Will whispered in his ear. Keanu pulled back and smiled. "Anytime. Just remember to breathe." Will nodded. "I'll remember." As Will walked out of the ballroom, the doors closing behind him, he didn't run to his car or wave frantically at the waiting paparazzi. He walked with a steady, measured pace. He looked up at the night sky for a second, taking a deep breath of the cool air. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to put on a show. He was just Will. And that was enough. Inside, the room felt emptier without the two of them, but the energy was still buzzing. The staff started clearing the glasses, wiping down the bar where the two men had stood. It was just a bar, just a corner of a room, but something important had happened there. It was a reminder that in a world full of noise and lights and constant showing off, the most powerful thing you can be is yourself. And sometimes, the loudest person in the room just needs a quiet friend to remind them to turn it down. The night ended, not with a bang, but with a peaceful silence that everyone appreciated. And that was the real victory. The comeback wasn't a sharp line or a joke, it was the return to reality. And nobody expected that to be the best part of the night.